Evening everyone, second time lucky. Sorry the old internet connection in Premier House not playing ball tonight. So I thought before everyone calls it a night, I would give you just a very quick refresh really for what everyone can expect tomorrow. We've got a few changes in what's allowed to happen in Auckland from tomorrow as part of our COVID response. The first thing that I wanted to really acknowledge is everything that everyone's done, particularly in Auckland to date, to get us to the position that we're in. That's the first thing. The second thing, I tried in the stand-up today to just give you a little bit of extra detail around what some of the scientific analysis has been telling us about the outbreak that we have in Auckland at the moment. So I shared a little bit of information that we've had come through from ESR. Two things that really stand out for me there. The first is actually that, as you will have heard me talk about before, the genome sequencing, the extra detail we get about, for want of a better word, and I'm sure someone will correct me on the way to describe this, but essentially that family that we're talking about of genome here for this strain's not the word sequence for COVID, is all the same. So that tells us that basically we're dealing with the same outbreak and that it has a single source. That's really useful for us to know. We're not dealing with multiple different outbreaks from different sources. We're dealing with one source that's caused this outbreak. What we also know is that we still have no earlier sign from where it came from other than its beginnings at the Americold worksite in Mount Wellington, the cool store that you'll recall from the 31st of July when we had our first person become unwell. So that's still what we know on that front. The second, I think, really important point to make for Auckland especially is that actually all of Auckland has been touched in some way by this particular cluster. So I've seen a few images that have suggest some perhaps different levels of complacency around Auckland. I'd really urge all Aucklanders to treat those restrictions and guidelines that we have in place the same, because actually Auckland itself has been touched by this cluster across the region, from over North Shore down through to the south, the west, central city. So that's why it's really important that everyone listens to the guidelines. So here's what happens from tomorrow. From tomorrow, shops will be able to open again, schools will be able to resume again, hospitality. They all have to operate in a particular way. So social distancing in shops and retail, also in hospitality. So you'll see again, table seatings will change. They'll be a bit more spaced out than usual in those settings. And if, for instance, you're going to a bar, there has to be seated service. So you don't, unfortunately, of course, this continues to affect different venues like music venues and clubs, because you have to be seated. That's how we make sure people keep their social distancing in those environments. So that's the basics there that people will be used to. I have described, though, Auckland as being at a form of level 2.5. That's because we've got extra restrictions on gatherings. So if you've got a birthday, or you want to catch up with your family, or you had other life events planned that you wanted to mark, unfortunately we just can't have gatherings larger than 10. So that includes in organised environments like church as well. Any of those environments, we just can't have gatherings of larger than 10. That's just simply because, of course, we are still in a very precautionary phase, and a lot of what we've seen with this cluster has been spread through those gatherings, and so keeping those restrictions will really help us. The second thing that makes this a bit of an added level, 2.5, is what we've done with masks, which is different than last time. So tomorrow, no matter where you are in the country, if you are on public transport, you do need to wear a mask or a face covering. So that can be something that is handmade. It can be something that you've fashioned yourself. I've done a couple of displays on how you can do that on social media. You can look up ways to create your own, or of course surgical masks, scarves, bandanas. If you are using a scarf or a bandana or something like that, just double it over a couple of times. It just gives you that extra weave, which makes a difference for how well they work. outside of public transport, if you're in Auckland, we're asking you to wear a mask as well. Now, we haven't mandated that, but we know it makes a difference. We know it's another way to keep you and people around you safe. So while we haven't mandated it, we are strongly encouraging it. So please do heed that advice. I've got one here that I'll be taking up to Auckland tomorrow, and so I'll be carrying mine up to Auckland tomorrow, so that's what I'll be wearing for the day when I'm out and about. I didn't plan to pull that out of my pocket, but I have one with me all of the time at the moment, just depending on where I am. The third thing is that aged care will continue to have restrictions, and I know that's really difficult, but particularly in Auckland it's going to be really important so that we can keep those in our aged care facilities safe. So those are some of just the extra restrictions that or guidelines that we're giving for the likes of Auckland, which means that they're at a bit of a 2.5 setting, whereas the rest of the country continue to be where they are. Darcy, you have asked about how it is that we're having gatherings on, social gatherings at 10, but schools are in a different category. In large part, that's because, of course, schools, we can keep it on. We know who are in our schools. We have very good records of who's in our schools. We can do contact tracing. We have protocols for how to deal with situations where we have contacts within schools. If, however, we're talking about multiple gatherings going on across a city, whether it's social gatherings and then church gatherings and so on, that just adds a layer of complexity. So the way to think about it really is we have to try and reduce risk. And so the more of these things you have going on, the more layers of risk that you have. So where we have something, things like schools going back and retail, you try and mitigate with some of the things you have going on there. But if you do other things like have social gatherings, you don't have mask use, that just adds those extra layers. So that's why we control what we can and we prioritise what we think really needs to be happening, and we add those protections in there as well. So that's what the expectations are for Auckland. The rest of the country stays at the level 2 you're already at. The other thing that I would say to Aucklanders, so of course this applies to your region, we're also asking that these rules apply to you no matter where you are. So if you have a reason where you need to leave Auckland, we're asking you, please don't just pop into an aged care facility outside of Auckland. Please don't attend a mass gathering. Think of those rules that apply to Auckland as applying to you as an Aucklander as well, and just add that extra layer of care. Now, the question you may ask is, why don't we just continue a regional boundary around Auckland? It is fair to say that one of the more difficult elements of having different settings across the country has been maintaining a workable regional boundary. And so we have been able to do that in a situation where we've essentially had Auckland is really on a bit of a stay-at-home notice. But as soon as we start opening up things like school and retail, maintaining a regional border where you're restricting movement just for those things like mass gatherings, that becomes very, very difficult to sustain around Auckland. So that's why ultimately the rest of the country has level 2, just to add that extra layer of precaution in there as well. I think that's really what I wanted to update everyone on today. Corey, you've asked when are we doing our next review. We said that before the 6th of September, so we'll be doing another review next week and making that announcement before the 6th of September rolls around. I would expect though, and we've said this a few times, absolutely we expect we will continue to have cases associated with this cluster. It will keep ticking over in that regard. But our alert levels framework is all pre-established for that. So that's what we've anticipated with the alert level framework, is managing cases like this in those situations as well. Okay, everyone.